He thought the ink on the divorce papers was his ticket to freedom. He thought casting his wife aside for a younger model was the ultimate power move. But Julian Thorne made one fatal miscalculation. He didn't check the time of death on his father's death certificate, and he certainly didn't read the fine print of the family trust. When the lawyer stood up at the will reading and read the final clause, the laughter in Julian's throat turned into a choke. He had signed away his marriage just 20 minutes too early, and in doing so, he had accidentally signed away an $80 million empire. Stick around, because this is the story of how the most arrogant man in New York lost everything in a single heartbeat. The scratching of the Mont Blanc pen against the crisp paper sounded like a scream in the silent office. Julian Thorne didn't just sign the divorce papers, he attacked them. His signature, Julian Alexander Thorne, was a mess of aggressive loops and sharp angles, taking up far more space than the dotted line allowed. When he finished the final E, he lifted the pen and tossed it onto the mahogany desk. It rolled, coming to a stop against a coaster that held his sweating glass of scotch. He threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a barking, victorious sound that bounced off the glass walls of the penthouse office overlooking Manhattan. "Done," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Finally. I thought you'd drag this out until Christmas, Elena. But look at you, being sensible for once." Elena sat opposite him. She was 34, but tonight she looked 50. Her blonde hair, usually kept in a pristine blowout, was pulled back into a severe, fraying bun. Her hands were folded in her lap, squeezing each other so hard her knuckles were white. She wore a simple grey dress that had seen better days, a stark contrast to Julian's tailored Italian suit that cost more than her father's car. "I just want peace, Julian," Elena whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes remained dry. She had cried enough tears over the last 6 months to fill the Hudson River outside. "You made it clear there was nothing left to save." "Save?" Julian scoffed, reaching for his scotch. "Elena, darling, you can't save a sinking ship. You are dead weight. You know it. I know it. Even my father knows it. Though the old man is too polite to say it to your face." Elena flinched at the mention of Arthur Thorne. Julian's father had been the only person in the Thorne dynasty who had treated her with genuine kindness. He was a titan of industry, a man who built Thorne Logistics from a single truck into a global empire, yet he always had time to ask Eleanor about her charity work or her painting. "How is Arthur?" Eleanor asked quietly. "I haven't been allowed to see him since you kicked me out." Julian waved a dismissive hand. "He's dying, Eleanor. That's what old men do. He's in hospice at the estate, unconscious mostly. Doctors say it's a matter of hours, maybe a day. Which is why—" He tapped the divorce papers with a manicured finger. "This timing is perfect." Elena looked up, confusion knitting her brow. "Perfect? Your father is dying and you're celebrating a divorce?" Julian leaned forward, his handsome face twisting into a sneer. "It's about the estate, Elena. The trust. Dad's old-fashioned. He has these archaic ideas about family units and spousal support. If I inherit the empire while I'm still married to you, you get a claim on the growth of the assets during the marriage. You could sue for a piece of the pie. But if I'm a single man when the clock strikes midnight on the old man's life, it's all mine, uncontested, clean." He checked his Rolex, a platinum Daytona. "It is 4:45 p.m. on October 14th. The judge has agreed to fast-track the filing electronically, as of right now." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen, sending a text to his lawyer. "You are nobody. Just a memory." The door to the office burst open. A woman walked in. She was everything Eleanor wasn't. Tall brunette, 22 years old, and wearing a red dress that was illegal in 3 states. This was Jessica. The reason for the late nights, the reason for the lipstick stains, the reason Elena's life had imploded. "Is it done, baby?" Jessica chirped, ignoring Elena entirely as she walked over to drape herself around Julian's shoulders. "Signed, sealed, and delivered," Julian grinned, kissing Jessica on the cheek. "Meet the new and improved single Julian Thorne." Jessica squealed and clapped her hands. "Oh my God, we have to celebrate. I booked a table at Le Bernardin." Finally, she looked at Eleanor. Her eyes swept over Eleanor's grey dress with a look of pure pity mixed with disgust. "Oh, you're still here? I thought the help would have escorted you out by now." Eleanor stood up slowly. Her legs felt heavy, but a strange calm was settling over her. She picked up a copy of the papers. "I'm leaving, Julian. I hope you find what you're looking for." Julian didn't even look up. He was pouring a glass of champagne for Jessica. "Goodbye, Elena. Don't let the elevator door hit you. And don't bother trying to visit the estate to say goodbye to Dad. Security has your photo. You're banned." Elena felt a sharp pain in her chest, not for Julian, but for Arthur. "He was like a father to me," she said softly. "He was my father," Julian snapped. "And now his money is my money. Get out!" Elena walked to the door. As she grabbed the handle, she heard them clinking glasses. "To the future!" Jessica cheered. "To the billions," Julian corrected. Elena closed the heavy oak door, shutting out the sound of their laughter. She walked down the long, marble corridor of the Thorne Enterprises building, clutching the papers that defined her failure. She felt small. She felt defeated. But as she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby, her phone buzzed. It was a text message. "Unknown number. Meet me at the St. Regis Hotel bar, 6 p.m. It's about Arthur. Come alone." Elena stared at the screen, her heart hammered against her ribs. Arthur? Was he gone? But why the secrecy? And why the St. Regis? She wiped a stray tear from her cheek, straightened her spine, and stepped out into the cooling October air. She had nothing left to lose. She might as well see this through to the end. The King Cole bar at the St. Regis was dimly lit, smelling of old leather and expensive cologne. It was a place where deals were made in whispers and secrets were traded like currency. Elena felt woefully underdressed in her grey wool dress, but she kept her head high. She scanned the room. In the back corner, tucked away in a curved velvet booth, sat a man. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair combed back impeccably and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. He wore a charcoal suit that whispered Savile Row. It was Harrison Finch, Arthur Thorne's personal attorney and oldest friend. Elena's breath hitched. Harrison had always been distant, a man of business, strictly professional. Why was he contacting her now? She approached the table. Harrison saw her and immediately stood up, a gesture of respect Julian hadn't shown her in 5 years. "Elena," he said, his voice grave. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Finch," Elena said, taking the seat opposite him. "Is Arthur?" "Arthur passed away 45 minutes ago," Harrison said softly. Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears welled up instantly, hot and fast. "Oh God, Arthur! I didn't get to say goodbye. Julian wouldn't let me." "I know," Harrison said. His eyes behind the glasses were cold, hard flint. "I know everything, Elena." He signaled the waiter, ordering a water for her and a scotch for himself. When they were alone again, he leaned in. "What time did you sign the papers, Elena?" Elena blinked, wiping her eyes. "The divorce papers? About 4:45 p.m. Julian was rushing it. He said he wanted it done before. She trailed off, the realization hitting her. He wanted it done before Arthur died, so I wouldn't have a claim on the estate. Harrison took a slow sip of his drink. A small, dry smile played on his lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap snap shut. 4:45 p.m., Harrison repeated, and Arthur died at 5:15 p.m. So Julian won, Elena whispered, looking down at her hands. He got what he wanted. He's single. He inherits everything. That is what Julian believes, Harrison said. Julian is a man who reads headlines, Elena, not footnotes. He assumes that Arthur was a fool. He assumes that because Arthur was sick, he was blind to his son's behavior. Harrison reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He placed it on the table but didn't open it. Arthur knew about Jessica, Harrison said. He knew about the neglect. He knew about the verbal abuse you suffered. He had private investigators watching Julian for the last 8 months. Arthur was heartbroken, Elena. He loved his son, but he hated the man he had become. Elena was stunned. He never said anything. Arthur was a strategist, Harrison replied. He knew if he confronted Julian, Julian would just hide the assets or manipulate the situation. Arthur wanted to test him. He wanted to see if Julian would stand by you in the hard times, or if he would cut you loose the moment he smelled money. Harrison tapped the envelope. 3 days ago, Arthur made an amendment to his last will and testament. It's a very specific codicil. It's what we in the legal world call a poison pill. A poison pill? Elena asked. Julian thinks the timeline saves him, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He thinks that by divorcing you before the moment of death, he secured the assets. But Arthur's amendment doesn't care about the moment of death in the way Julian thinks. Harrison checked his pocket watch. The funeral will be in 3 days. The reading of the will is scheduled for next Friday. Julian will be there. He will bring that girl, Jessica. He will be expecting a coronation. Harrison looked Elena dead in the eye. You need to be there, Elena. Me? Elena shook her head. I can't. I'm not family anymore. I signed the papers. I'm nobody. You are named in the will, Harrison said firmly. You are required to attend, and I suggest you go shopping. Buy the most expensive black dress you can find. Walk in there with your head held high. Because, my dear, the show Julian thinks he's directing? He's not the director. He's the clown. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. Mr. Finch, what did Arthur do? Harrison stood up, leaving a $100 bill on the table for the drinks. He buttoned his jacket. He played the long game, Elena. Now, go home. Rest. You have a very big week ahead of you. Harrison turned and walked away, disappearing into the gloom of the hotel lobby, leaving Eleanor alone with the envelope, which Harrison had notably not let her open, and a burning question in her mind. What kind of trap had Arthur set? And was it enough to stop a monster like Julian? The day of Arthur Thorne's funeral was as grey and weeping as the city of New York itself. It was a Tuesday, a day the stock market was open, which Julian found fitting. Even in death, his father was disrupting business. The service was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral, a venue reserved for the holy and the ultra-wealthy. Arthur Thorne was certainly the latter. The pews were packed with the elite of Manhattan, senators, tech moguls, shipping magnates, and rivals who had come to make sure the old lion was truly dead. Julian stood at the front, the grieving son. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit, black as a raven's wing, cut to accentuate his broad shoulders. He looked somber, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye whenever a camera flashed. But inside, his mind was racing with numbers. He was calculating the inheritance tax, the liquidation value of the summer homes, and the cost of the rebrand he planned for Thorn Logistics. He was going to fire half the board of directors by Monday morning. Beside him stood Jessica. She was trying too hard. Her black dress was low-cut, revealing far too much cleavage for a Catholic mass, and her hat was a wide-brimmed monstrosity that looked more suited for the Kentucky Derby than a funeral. She was scrolling through Instagram on her phone, hiding it behind her purse. "Stop it," Julian hissed out of the side of his mouth. "You look like a bored teenager. Put the phone away." "It's so long, Julian," Jessica whined in a whisper, snapping gum she wasn't supposed to be chewing. "And it smells like old people in here. It smells like incense and power, you idiot. Act like you belong." Julian scanned the crowd. He felt a surge of triumph. They were all looking at him. The new king. He had timed it perfectly. The divorce decree had been processed. He was legally single. Every penny Arthur left him, and it would be billions, was safe from Elena's grasp. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral creaked open. A hush rippled through the back rows, moving forward like a wave. Heads turned. Whispers started, a low buzz that competed with the organ music. Julian turned his head, annoyed. Who dared interrupt his moment? Walking down the center aisle was a woman. For a second, Julian didn't recognize her. She wore a black dress, but it wasn't the frumpy grey wool he was used to seeing. This was high fashion, a structured, long-sleeved midi dress that hugged a figure he had forgotten she possessed. She wore black stilettos that clicked rhythmically against the stone floor. Her blonde hair was no longer in a messy bun. It fell in perfectly styled waves around her face, partially obscured by a chic, net veil. It was Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor who had cried in his office 3 days ago. This woman radiated a cold, regal dignity. She walked with her chin up, ignoring the hundreds of eyes dissecting her appearance. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight at the closed casket of the man she had loved like a father. "What is she doing here?" Jessica hissed, her jealousy flaring instantly. "You said she was banned." "I did," Julian growled, his jaw tightening. He signaled to the head of his security detail, a large man named Brutus, standing near the pillars. Julian made a cutting motion across his throat. "Get her out." Brutus stepped forward to intercept Eleanor halfway down the aisle. The crowd held its breath. A scene at Arthur Thorne's funeral? This was better than the eulogy. As Brutus reached for Eleanor's arm, a cane shot out from a pew, blocking his path. Harrison Finch stood up. The old lawyer didn't look frail today. He looked dangerous. He said something quietly to Brutus, 2 words that made the giant security guard pale and step back immediately. Harrison offered his arm to Eleanor. She took it. Together they walked the rest of the aisle, right past Julian. Elena didn't even look at him. She didn't acknowledge Jessica's glare. She walked to the front row, on the opposite side of the aisle from Julian, and sat down. "Unbelievable," Julian muttered, straightening his tie. "She thinks showing up here is going to get her a payout? She's delusional. She looks expensive," Jessica noted, her voice small. "It's a costume," Julian scoffed. "She's probably maxed out the credit cards I haven't cancelled yet. Don't worry. By next week, she'll be selling that dress on eBay to pay rent." The priest began the homily, speaking of Arthur's generosity, his vision, his love for his family. Julian tuned it out. He was watching Elena. She was weeping silently, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. It annoyed him. Her grief looked genuine, which made his performance look hollow. "Stop crying," he thought. "He wasn't even your father." After the service, the burial took place at the Thorne family crypt in Sleepy Hollow. The rain had intensified, turning the cemetery into a mud slick. Under a canopy of black umbrellas, the inner circle gathered. As the casket was lowered, Julian threw the first handful of dirt. He felt a finality to it. Goodbye, Dad. Thanks for the empire. As the crowd began to disperse toward the waiting limousines, Julian cornered Elena near the iron gates. He told Jessica to wait in the car. "You have a lot of nerve," Julian spat, approaching her. Rain dripped from his umbrella, but Elena was dry, sheltered by Harrison Finch, who stood beside her like a gargoyle. Elena turned slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her gaze was steady. "Hello, Julian. It was a beautiful service." "Don't give me that," Julian sneered. "You're here to garner sympathy. You think if you cry loud enough, the board members will take pity on you? It's over, Elena. The divorce is final. You get nothing." "I didn't come for money," Elena said softly. "I came to bury my father-in-law." "Ex-father-in-law," Julian corrected sharply. "And I don't want you at the reading of the will on Friday. If you show up, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Harrison Finch cleared his throat. It sounded like a dry branch snapping. "Actually, Julian," the lawyer said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain, "Elena is required to attend. As the executor of the estate, I have already sent the formal summons. If she does not attend, the proceedings cannot begin." Julian stared at the old lawyer, his eyes narrowing. "Why? Did he leave her a cat? A painting? Fine. Let her come. Let her see exactly how much she lost by being a bore." Julian leaned in close to Eleanor, invading her personal space. "Come on, Friday. Bring a bucket for your tears. Because when you hear that I own everything, the houses, the jets, the company, and you are left with nothing but your dignity, I want to see the look on your face." He turned on his heel and marched toward his waiting Rolls-Royce, where Jessica was reapplying her lipstick in the vanity mirror. Elena watched him go. She felt a tremble in her hands, but Harrison squeezed her arm gently. "Steady, Elena," Harrison whispered. "Let him gloat. Pride comes before the fall." "He's so confident, Harrison," Elena whispered. "Are you sure? Are you sure Arthur really did what you said?" "Arthur knew his son better than anyone," Harrison replied, leading her toward his vintage Jaguar. "Julian sees the world as a transaction. He thinks he signed a contract of freedom when he signed those divorce papers. He has no idea he signed his own death warrant." Friday arrived with a suffocating tension. The reading was to take place in the library of the Thorne Manor, a sprawling estate in the Hamptons that had been in the family for 4 generations. The room was a masterpiece of intimidation, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a roaring fireplace that did little to warm the chill in the air, and a massive oak table that seated 20. Julian sat at the head of the table. He had kicked his father's usual chair aside and replaced it with a more modern, high-backed executive chair he had brought in just for the occasion. It was a power move. To his right sat Jessica. She was wearing white, a choice that read bridal and was entirely inappropriate for a will reading. She was already mentally decorating the manor, whispering to Julian about tearing down the creepy tapestries. To his left sat the board of directors of Thorne Logistics, 3 men in grey suits who looked nervous. They knew Julian's reputation for ruthlessness. At the far end of the table, alone, sat Elena. She wore a navy blue business suit. She sat with her hands folded, her posture perfect. She looked less like a grieving widow and more like a CEO in waiting, though Julian laughed internally at the thought. Harrison Finch stood at the head of the room, a podium before him. He arranged his papers with agonizing slowness. He took off his glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on. "Can we get on with this, Finch?" Julian barked, checking his watch. "I have a meeting with the investors in the city at 3. I need the title transfer documents signed by noon." "Patience, Julian," Harrison said, his voice devoid of warmth. "The reading of the last will and testament of Arthur James Thorne is a legal proceeding. It will be done correctly," Harrison began. The first hour was excruciatingly boring. Arthur had been a meticulous man. He left specific sums to the gardener, the cook, the chauffeur. He left donations to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Red Cross, and a shelter for stray dogs. Julian rolled his eyes, drumming his fingers on the table. "Great, the dog gets $5,000. Marvelous. Can we get to the assets? The real assets?" "We are arriving there now," Harrison said. He turned a page. The paper rustled loudly in the silent room. "Article 7. The real estate," Harrison read. Julian straightened up. This was it. "To my son, Julian Alexander Thorne," Harrison read. Julian smirked, squeezing Jessica's hand. "I leave the family estate in the Hamptons, the penthouse in Manhattan, and the villa in Tuscany." "Yes," Julian hissed. Jessica let out a small squeal. "Subject to the conditions of the trust outlined in Article 9. Harrison finished. Julian frowned. "Conditions? What conditions? I'm the sole heir." "Article 8. The financial assets and control of Thorne Logistics," Harrison continued, ignoring the interruption. "This includes the 51% controlling stake in the company, the investment portfolio, and all liquid cash assets, totaling approximately $80 billion. The room went dead silent. 80 billion. It was a number that made the board members sweat. "I leave these assets." Harrison paused. He looked up over his glasses, staring directly at Julian. "To the Thorne Family Trust, to be administered by the primary beneficiary." "Which is me," Julian said, standing up. "I am the primary beneficiary. I am his only son." "Sit down, Julian," Harrison said sharply. The command was so authoritative that Julian actually sat, stunned. Harrison took a sip of water. The tension was so thick it felt like physical pressure against the eardrums. "Arthur anticipated that there might be complications regarding your marital status at the time of his death," Harrison said. Julian laughed, a nervous, barking laugh. "Complications? There are no complications. I am divorced. It is finalized. I am a single man. Therefore, there is no spousal claim. The money is mine." "Arthur was aware of your intentions," Harrison said. He wrote a specific clause. Article 9. The definition of the beneficiary. Harrison lifted the document and began to read the text that would destroy Julian's life. "I, Arthur Thorne, being of sound mind, recognize that my son, Julian, has often prioritized personal gain over loyalty. I have observed his treatment of his wife, Elena, a woman who has shown me more kindness in her little finger than my son has in his whole body." Julian's face turned purple. "This is ridiculous. He can't put insults in a will." "Therefore," Harrison raised his voice, "the control of the Thorne Family Trust and all assets therein are contingent upon the stability of the family unit. If, at the time of my death, Julian Thorne is happily married to and residing with Elena Thorne, then Julian shall inherit 100% of the estate." Julian slammed his hand on the table. "I knew it. He tried to trap me, but I beat him. I divorced her. I'm not married to her. So the clause is void." "Let me finish," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "However," Harrison read, "if Julian Thorne has filed for divorce, is separated, or is no longer married to Elena Thorne at the time of my death, then I hereby declare that Julian has failed the test of character required to lead this family and this company." Julian froze. The blood drained from his face. Jessica stopped chewing her gum. In the event of such a divorce or separation, Harrison continued, reading the death sentence, I hereby disinherit Julian Alexander Thorne entirely. He shall receive a one-time stipend of $50,000, provided he vacates all family properties within 24 hours. What? Julian screamed, standing up and knocking his chair over. That's illegal. You can't do that. And, Harrison read on, his eyes shifting to the woman at the end of the table, I hereby bequeath the entirety of the estate, the properties, the cash, and the controlling interest in Thorne Logistics to the one person who understood the meaning of loyalty. I leave it all to my former daughter-in-law, Elena Thorne. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stood there, mouth open, his hands shaking. He looked at Harrison. He looked at the board members, who were now looking at Elena with newfound respect and fear. He looked at Jessica, who was looking at Julian with sudden horror. And finally, he looked at Elena. Elena hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still. She took a slow breath. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, as if thanking Arthur, and then opened them. They were clear and steely. This is a joke, Julian whispered. It's a sick joke. I signed the papers. I signed them to protect the money. You signed them, Harrison said, closing the folder with a satisfying thud, to protect the money from Eleanor. But in doing so, you activated the clause that gave the money to Eleanor. You played yourself, Julian. No, Julian roared. He lunged toward the table. I'll contest it. I'll sue. I'll tie this up in court for decades. You can try, Harrison said calmly. But Arthur filmed a video statement explaining his reasoning, specifically for the judge. He cites your infidelity, which we have documented, and your financial recklessness. The will is ironclad. You have nothing, Julian. Jessica stood up slowly. She looked at Julian, then at the $50,000 figure mentioned, and then at Elena, who was now worth $80 billion. Wait, Jessica said, her voice shrill. So, he's broke? Completely, Harrison confirmed. Jessica looked at Julian with pure disgust. You told me you were going to be the king of New York. I am, Julian shouted, grabbing her arm. Jess, don't listen to him. We'll fix this. Jessica yanked her arm away. Don't touch me. I'm not dating a pauper. She grabbed her purse and walked out of the room without looking back. Julian was left standing alone, breathing heavily, the walls of the library feeling like they were closing in. He turned to Elena. His eyes were wild, desperate. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrifying realization of his new reality. Elena, he stammered. Elena, baby, you know I didn't mean it. The divorce. It was just business. We can fix this. We can remarry. We can share it. Elena stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She picked up her clutch. She walked slowly down the length of the table until she was standing right in front of Julian. She looked at the man who had tormented her, cheated on her, and discarded her like trash. You're right, Julian, she said, her voice calm and cool like a winter wind. It was just business. She turned to the security guards, Julian's own security guards. Escort Mr. Thorne off the property, Elena commanded. He has 24 hours to vacate the penthouse. Change the locks at noon tomorrow. The guards hesitated only for a second. They looked at the penniless man and then at the multi-billionaire woman. They made their choice. Sir, Brutus said, stepping forward and grabbing Julian's arm. It's time to go. Get your hands off me, Julian screamed as they dragged him toward the door. I am a Thorne. I own this place. Elena, Elena. Elena didn't turn around. She looked at Harrison Finch. Mr. Finch, she said, I believe we have a company to run. Harrison smiled, a genuine smile this time. Yes, Miss Thorne, I believe we do. But as the heavy doors slammed shut on Julian's screaming figure, Elena knew the story wasn't over. Julian was a narcissist, and a wounded narcissist is the most dangerous animal on earth. He wouldn't just go away. He would come back, and he would come back with a vengeance. And she had a secret too, one that even Harrison didn't know, one that made this inheritance more complicated than anyone realized. Elena placed a hand on her stomach. She had found out that morning. She was pregnant, and the father was the man she had just kicked out into the street. The fall from the penthouse to the pavement was brutal. 3 weeks after the will reading, Julian Thorne was living in a reality he had only ever seen in movies he turned off halfway through. The stipend of $50,000, a sum he used to spend on a weekend in Monaco, was evaporating faster than water on a hot sidewalk. He had tried to check into the Four Seasons, but his credit cards were declined. The black card? Cancelled. The platinum? Frozen. The bank accounts had been drained by the estate to cover outstanding debts incurred by the beneficiary. Julian was now staying at the Blue Horizon Motel in Queens, a place where the neon sign buzzed like an angry wasp and the sheets smelled of bleach and regret. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at his phone. He had called everyone, the senators he had dined with, the hedge fund managers he had parted with, even the guys he played poker with on Thursdays. Ghosted. All of them. In the world of the ultra-rich, poverty is a contagious disease. Nobody wanted to be near the man who lost $80 billion. Even Jessica had blocked his number after he asked to crash on her couch. Ungrateful parasites, Julian muttered, throwing his phone against the wall. It cracked, but he didn't care. He paced the small, stained carpet. He wasn't done. He refused to be done. He was a thorn. He had built connections his father didn't know about. There was one man who hated Arthur Thorne almost as much as Julian now did. Marcus Sterling. Sterling was a corporate raider, a man who bought companies, stripped them for parts, and sold the scraps. Arthur had spent 40 years keeping Sterling away from Thorne Logistics. Julian put on his one remaining suit, now wrinkled as he couldn't afford the dry cleaner, and took the subway into Manhattan. The indignity of the crowded train, the smell of sweat and metal, fueled his rage. Elena is sitting in my office, he thought. She's probably redecorating. She's laughing at me. He arrived at Sterling Capital's headquarters. He didn't have an appointment, but he had a name. When he told the receptionist who he was, he expected to be turned away. Instead, he was ushered immediately to the top floor. Marcus Sterling was a small man with eyes like a reptile. He sat behind a glass desk, peeling an orange with a small, sharp knife. The prodigal son, Sterling smiled, not offering a handshake. Or should I say, the disinherited son. I heard about the will. Family unit. Arthur always was a sentimental old fool. He was a senile tyrant, Julian spat, sitting down uninvited. I want my company back, Marcus, and I know you've been trying to buy Thorne Logistics for a decade. I have, Sterling agreed, popping a slice of orange into his mouth. But you have nothing to sell, Julian. Your ex-wife owns 51% of the shares. She is the queen. You are a liability. I know where the bodies are buried. Julian leaned in, his eyes manic. I know the offshore accounts. I know the weak points in the supply chain. I know the board members who can be bribed. You bankroll my legal team to contest the will, and I will give you the blueprints to destroy Elena's administration from the inside. When I get the company back, I'll sell you the Asian shipping division for pennies on the dollar. Sterling stopped chewing. He looked at Julian with genuine interest. You'd gut your father's legacy just to spite your ex-wife. I'd burn it to the ground if it meant she burned with it, Julian said, his voice trembling with hate. Sterling smiled. It was a terrifying sight. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "I like your fire, Julian. It's disgusting, but useful." He scribbled a check and slid it across the glass. It was for $500,000. "Get a haircut, get a new suit, and hire the nastiest lawyer in the city. We are going to war." Meanwhile, in the ivory tower of Thorn Logistics, Elena was fighting a different kind of war. She was in the executive bathroom, clutching the porcelain sink, her knuckles white. She dry-heaved for the third time that morning. "Ms. Thorne?" Harrison's voice came through the door, filled with concern. "The shareholders' meeting starts in 10 minutes. Are you all right?" Elena splashed cold water on her face. She looked in the mirror. She was pale. The stress of the last 3 weeks was eating her alive. She was running a global empire, dodging paparazzi who camped outside her house, and dealing with a board of directors who thought she was a diversity hire gone wrong. And she was pregnant, 8 weeks along. She had done the math, the night of the gala 2 months ago. Julian had been drunk, charming, and for a brief moment, the man she used to love. A moment of weakness, a final attempt to save the marriage before the papers were drawn up. She touched her stomach. This child was a miracle, but it was also a nuclear bomb. If Julian found out, the narrative would flip. He could claim that the family unit was technically ongoing because of the child. He could sue for full custody, arguing that a single mother running a CEO position couldn't care for an infant. He could use the baby as a pawn to force a settlement. "I'm fine, Harrison," Eleanor said, opening the door. She forced a smile. "Just something I ate." Harrison studied her closely. He was sharp. He noticed the way her hand hovered over her midsection before dropping away. He noticed the ginger tea on her desk instead of her usual coffee. "Elena," he said, his voice low. "If there is anything medical that might impact your standing, we need to prepare." "I'm fine," she insisted, walking past him. "Let's go face the wolves." She walked into the boardroom. 20 men in suits turned to look at her. They were ready to tear her apart. "Gentlemen," Elena said, taking the seat at the head of the table, Julian's old seat. "Let's begin." She didn't know that halfway across the city, Julian was walking out of a bespoke tailor shop, looking like $1 billion again, with a plan to crash the very event she was organizing to solidify her power. The Thorn Foundation Winter Gala was next week, and Julian had an invitation, courtesy of Marcus Sterling. The Winter Gala was the social event of the season. It was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specifically in the Temple of Dendor room. The massive sandstone temple was illuminated by golden uplighting, and the great glass wall looked out over Central Park. Elena stood at the top of the receiving line. She wore a custom emerald green gown that was structured specifically to hide any hint of a bump. It was loose around the waist but elegant. She looked regal, untouchable. She had spent the last week winning over the board. She had discovered discrepancies in Julian's old accounting, money he had siphoned off for his mistresses, and used it to shame the dissenters into silence. She was proving to be Arthur's true heir in spirit, not just in name. Harrison stood nearby, acting as her gatekeeper. "You're doing beautifully, Elena," he whispered. "Arthur would be proud." "I'm exhausted, Harrison," she admitted, smiling at a senator while shaking his hand. "My feet are killing me. Just 1 more hour, then we can—" The air in the room changed. It wasn't a sound, but a silence. The chatter near the entrance died down instantly. The string quartet seemed to falter. Elena looked up. Walking through the entrance wasn't just Julian. It was Julian, flanked by Marcus Sterling, and a team of 3 videographers who were live streaming. Julian looked spectacular. He was wearing a white dinner jacket, looking like James Bond if James Bond was a sociopath. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't ashamed. He was beaming. He walked straight toward Elena. Security stepped forward, but Marcus Sterling held up a hand. "We are ticketed guests," Sterling announced loudly, his voice carrying through the cavernous room. "I purchased a platinum table this morning. Unless you want a discrimination lawsuit on live video, I suggest you let us pass." Elena signaled the guards to stand down. She wouldn't cause a scene. Not here. Julian walked up the steps to where Elena stood. He stopped 1 step below her, so they were eye to eye. "Hello, wife," he said, the word dripping with irony. "Ex-wife," Elena corrected, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "What do you want, Julian? There is no cash bar for you to raid." A few people nearby tittered nervously. Julian's smile didn't waver. "I'm just here to support the family legacy," Julian said, raising his voice so the cameras could catch it. "And to make an announcement." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you all know the story. The tragic son, cut off by a bitter ex-wife who manipulated a dying man on his deathbed." "Stop this," Harrison warned, stepping forward. "I won't stop," Julian shouted, "because I have filed a motion today. A motion to exhume my father's body." Gasps ripple through the room. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "You wouldn't." "I would," Julian hissed, turning back to her. "We have reason to believe he was under the influence of narcotics when he signed that codicil. Narcotics you administered." "That is a lie!" Elena cried out. The stress hit her like a physical blow. The room began to spin. The heat of the lights, the flash of the cameras, the smell of Julian's cologne. It was too much. She swayed. "Elena!" Harrison grabbed her elbow. She felt the nausea rising, violent and uncontrollable. She tried to hold it back, but her hand flew to her mouth. She gagged, stumbling backward. Julian watched her. He watched the way she paled. He watched the way her hand didn't go to her chest, but protectively over her lower stomach. He froze. He knew that look. He had seen it once before, years ago, when his sister was pregnant. The specific, greenish pallor of a woman trying not to get sick in public. He looked at her waist. The dress was loose, too loose for her usual style. His eyes widened. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. The timeline. The one last night they had shared 2 months ago. Elena regained her composure, taking a deep breath. "I'm fine," she said, straightening up. "Get him out of here." Julian didn't move. He didn't shout. He started to laugh. It was a low, terrifying chuckle. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He leaned in, so his lips were brushing her ear. The cameras couldn't hear this. Only Elena could. "You're pregnant," he whispered. Elena stiffened. She didn't breathe. "I see it," Julian whispered, his voice trembling with a new kind of excitement. "You're carrying my child, my heir." "It's not yours," Elena hissed back, a desperate lie. "We both know it is." Julian pulled back, looking at her with a triumphant, wolfish grin. "And you know what the will says? Family unit. If there is a child, a Thorn child, then the lineage is secure." He looked at her stomach, then back at her eyes. "You can't kick me out, Elena. Not anymore. I'm not just your ex-husband. I'm the father of the $80 billion baby." Julian turned to the cameras, buttoning his jacket. "Enjoy the party, everyone," he announced cheerfully. "Eleanor and I have a lot to discuss. It seems the Thorn family is expanding." He winked at Eleanor, turned and walked away, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Eleanor stood frozen on the steps. She felt cold. He knew. The trap Arthur had set for Julian had just snapped back on her. Julian had a way back in, and this time he wouldn't settle for money. He would want everything. The child, the company, the control. Harrison looked at Elena, his face grey. He had heard the whisper. "Elena," he asked quietly, "is it true?" Elena looked at the old lawyer, tears finally spilling over. "God help us, Harrison," she whispered. Yes. The next morning, the headlines were brutal. "Billion-dollar bump. Is the Thorne Empire about to have a new heir?" Ex-husband claims paternity in stunning gala showdown. Eleanor sat in her office, the blinds drawn. She hadn't slept. The stress was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. "He's filed for an emergency injunction," Harrison Finch said, walking into the room with a stack of legal documents that looked like a brick. "He's suing for reinstatement as a trustee. His argument is simple. The will mentions the family unit. He claims that a child created during the marriage, even if born after, constitutes a continuation of that unit." "He doesn't care about the baby," Elena said, her hand resting on her stomach. "He just wants the checkbook." "We know that," Harrison said, sitting down heavily. "But the law is tricky, Elena. Paternity gives him rights. If he proves he is the father, which he is, he can petition for custody. And if he gets custody, he can petition to control the child's inheritance until they are 21. He could drain the trust in the name of child support and lifestyle maintenance." Elena stood up, pacing the room. "Arthur protected the money from Julian. He protected me from Julian. Did he really leave a loophole big enough for Julian to drive a truck through just because I'm pregnant?" Harrison was silent. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. For the first time, the old lawyer looked unsure. "Arthur wanted grandchildren, Elena. He was desperate for them. It is possible he didn't write an exclusion clause for this specific scenario, because he never imagined Julian would divorce you while you were carrying his child." A chill went through the room. If Arthur hadn't anticipated this, Julian could win. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Thorne," the secretary's voice trembled. "Mr. Thorne is here. And Mr. Sterling, and the police." Elena's eyes widened. "The police?" The doors swung open. Julian walked in, looking like he owned the place. He was flanked by Marcus Sterling and 2 uniformed NYPD officers. "There she is," Julian pointed at Elena. "I'd like to file a report for attempted fraud and custodial interference." "Get out of my office," Elena said, her voice shaking but loud. "It's not your office anymore," Julian sneered. He slammed a piece of paper on the desk. "This is a court order from Judge Chamberlain. Pending a DNA test, I have been granted temporary visitation rights to ensure the health of the fetus is not being compromised by your stressful work environment." He leaned over the desk, his eyes dead and cold. "Marcus and I have a proposal. You step down. You sign over full control of the trust to me as the father. In exchange, I won't sue for full custody. I'll let you keep the kid on weekends. You can be the mummy. I'll be the CEO." Elena looked at him with pure loathing. "You would trade your child for a job title?" "I'm trading a liability for an asset," Julian smiled. "Business 101, darling. Arthur taught me that." Elena looked at Harrison. The lawyer was furiously reading the court order, looking for a flaw, a mistake, anything. But he was silent. Julian checked his watch. "You have until noon to sign the resignation, or we go to court, and I drag your name through the mud so deep you'll never get a job as a waitress, let alone a CEO." He turned to leave. "Tick-tock, Elena." As Julian reached the door, Harrison Finch stood up. "Wait." The single word stopped Julian. He turned around, annoyed. "Save the speech, old man. You lost." "I didn't lose," Harrison said. His voice was strange. It wasn't defeated. It was perplexed. He was holding the very back page of the will, a page that had been sealed in a separate envelope, marked, "To be opened only in the event of issue." Harrison had just broken the seal. "I apologize, Elena," Harrison said, his eyes scanning the document rapidly. "I had forgotten about Codicil 14. Arthur wrote it 5 years ago, after Julian's first indiscretion." "What are you mumbling about?" Julian snapped. Harrison looked up. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "Arthur did want grandchildren," Harrison said. But Arthur was also a student of history. He knew that sometimes kings produce monsters. Harrison walked around the desk and placed the document in front of Julian. "Read it, Julian, out loud." Julian snatched the paper. He scoffed. "Article 14. The bloodline bypass." He paused. He frowned. "In the event that a child is born to my son, Julian, after a divorce filing has been initiated." Julian's voice wavered. "I hereby declare that the inheritance shall skip the generation of the son entirely." "Keep reading," Harrison commanded. "The child shall become the sole beneficiary of the Thorn Trust from the moment of birth. However," Julian stopped. His face went pale. "However?" Elena asked, stepping forward. "However," Julian whispered, his throat dry. "To prevent the father from using the child as a financial instrument, I hereby mandate that if Julian Thorn is not married to the mother at the time of birth, he is legally designated as a biological donor only." Julian dropped the paper. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice high and panicked. Harrison picked up the paper and read the final blow. "As a biological donor, Julian Thorn is expressly forbidden from acting as trustee, guardian of the estate, or conservator for the child. He shall have no access to the funds, no voting rights in the company, and no salary. The sole guardianship of the estate and the company shall rest with the mother, Elena Thorn, until the child reaches the age of 25. Harrison took off his glasses and looked at Julian with pity. "You played the family unit card, Julian, but Arthur defined the unit. By divorcing Eleanor, you removed yourself from it. The baby is rich. Eleanor is powerful. You are just the donor." The room was silent. Even Marcus Sterling took a step away from Julian, sensing the radioactive failure radiating off him. This is fake," Julian screamed. "I'll contest it." "It was notarized by a Supreme Court justice," Harrison said calmly. "It's ironclad." Elena looked at Julian. The fear was gone. In its place was a fierce, protective calm. "You wanted a DNA test?" Elena asked. "Fine, we'll do it. Prove you're the donor, and once that's done, you can pay child support." "Child support?" Julian choked. "I have no money." "Then you better get a job," Elena said. "I hear the warehouse in New Jersey is hiring. Minimum wage. Night shift." She pointed to the door. "Get out." 6 months later, the boardroom of Thorn Logistics was quiet, save for the soft cooing of a baby. Elena sat at the head of the table. She looked tired but happy. In a bassinet beside her lay Arthur James Thorn II, a baby with bright blue eyes and a tuft of blonde hair. "The Q4 numbers are in," Harrison said, sliding a report across the table. "Profits are up 15% since the rebranding. The shareholders are ecstatic." "Good," Elena said, signing the report. She reached into the bassinet and let the baby wrap his tiny hand around her finger. "And the other matter?" "Resolved," Harrison said. He didn't need to elaborate. Julian Thorn had tried to sue. He had spent the last of Sterling's money on a desperate legal Hail Mary. The judge had laughed him out of court, citing the donor clause. Marcus Sterling had dropped Julian the moment the verdict came in. Without the Thorne fortune, Julian was useless to him. Last week, a paparazzi photographer had snapped a picture of Julian. He wasn't in a tuxedo. He wasn't in a penthouse. He was spotted leaving a pawn shop in the Bronx, selling a platinum Rolex, the last remnant of his old life. He looked older. He looked broken. He had signed the divorce papers laughing. Now, nobody was laughing but fate. Elena picked up her son. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. The empire was hers. Not because she married into it, but because she had the strength to keep it. "We're going to build something good, little one," she whispered to the baby. "Something your grandfather would be proud of." She looked at her reflection in the glass. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the matriarch. And somewhere, out in the cold rain of the city, Julian Thorne pulled his collar up against the wind, realizing too late that the most expensive thing he ever signed was his own exit. The story of Julian Thorne is a brutal reminder that arrogance is the most expensive luxury in the world. He thought he could outsmart a father who built an empire and discard a wife who gave him everything. He treated people like assets and relationships like contracts. In the end, he learned the hard way that in the court of life, character is the only currency that matters. He signed away his marriage for freedom, but he ended up signing away his legacy. Wow, what a roller coaster. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and the ultimate revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. What do you think? Did Julian deserve his fate? Or was the father's will too cruel? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.